Welcome back, everybody, to another installment of Seriously Burning to Know More. I'm Legion Medell.
I'm Ron.
I'm Liz. There's our mascot Sirius, and not with us today, but ever present is Dr. Stephen Pine, who we met with a few weeks ago. It'll be a unique honor to have some of his comments and our questions posed to him throughout our podcast.
As much as we'd love Dr. Pine to be part of our usual band of four, he sadly, of course, has his own busy schedule, so he'll be joining us through said recordings. And we're here today to inform you on another riveting case of natural disasters that have shaped America. Our objective in this episode is to go over the scale and damage of the fire, the methodology behind its response, and how its consequences affected policy then and now. With formalities out of the way, join us as we brave those 1988 flames that reshaped the way we see fire.
Before we get into the methodology and the consequences and how this affected policy, first let's set the stage and let's talk a bit about the scale. And we wanted to provide some kind of background details of what happened with the Yellowstone fire of 1988 and why it was so impactful. So let me go through some of those details here. The 1988 Yellowstone fire occurred in and around the surrounding areas of Yellowstone Park, um, beginning around June of 1988, continuing on through around late September. We're looking at a total of 4,168 separate fires. Many of those um, caused secondary fires to kick off and spread further. And that spanned a total land area of 2,175,903 acres. Now, to give y'all a little spatial understanding of what that land area looks like, how big that is, um, I did the calculations, and that's about half the total land area of Maricopa County. Or
Wow.
we could calculate that out to be about two or three Rhode Islands. Within the first week, the fire acreage, and by fire acreage, I mean the amount of area actively burning, doubled within the first week to 17,000 acres. And to me, that's a huge amount of area to be burning, but also exponentially growing that quickly. Um, we look at what was affected. Where did this occur? The National Park Service Archives has developed a really nice survey map, and we'll link that map down in the description so you can reference it. Um, the fires across these 3 months really were centered in three key areas. The northwestern portion of Yellowstone Park, um, up in the northwestern corner of Wyoming around the Gallatin National Forest. Another area with some significant fires around the Shoshone and Custer National Forests, and those spanned across state boundaries. And then in the south, just south of Yellowstone Lake, another significant area that also crossed boundaries around the Bridger Teton National Forest area. And so this was not just in Yellowstone, but spanned a very significant area.
And that's a great point you make. It's almost a misnomer in a way to call it the Yellowstone fire because actually 63% of the total acreage of the fire burned outside of the park itself.
Yes, that's right. Some of the initial fires did kick off within the boundaries of Yellowstone, but like I said, these burns are building off of each other and spreading at incredible rates and doubling almost weekly.
Thank you for that, Ron. Seeing and hearing so much about what the scale of the fire was on its own, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what was done in the actions once it started to flame. For example, we listened to another oral history by the chief of maintenance of Yellowstone at the time, Tim Hudson, and he talked largely about irrigation and improvised ways of fire management. Based on the October preliminary survey of the Greater Yellowstone Postfire Committee and the adjoined coordinating committee Q&A, we see, quote, 10 million gallons of water were dropped by helicopters alone, end quote, and each individual fire had its own management team with bulldozers, copters, and crews. The coordinating committee also states that, quote, 81% of the 249 fires were, quote, suppressed at less than 10 acres, close quote. Uh, Dr. Pines, we asked him about this, and he had some more insight about improvisation on the ground with fire.
So improvisation was great, particularly to protect the Old Faithful Lodge and sort of historic build environments and the rest. And now various kinds of devices, including sprinkler systems, are used to protect structures, sequoia groves that are threatened, other things. So that is now a recognized technique. I don't know how much it might have been used prior to that, but Yellowstone certainly advertised it.
He also mentioned the failure of fire management in both his Bioscience and Natural History magazine articles. Instead of prevention, there was a lot of exceptionalist mentality that the Yellowstone Park and its fire team did not prepare for in advance. So that obviously had an impact as well.
Well, and I'll jump in there on that. And there was a significant impact on animals within the park and the surrounding, we'll call it Greater Yellowstone area. There was a total documented 300 large mammals. We're not counting the small animals, large mammals, 246 elk, 9 bison, and several other species that were lost to the fires.
That's not even to mention that they focused on the buildings. There was a policy to stay one building ahead of the fire. So definitely this human-centric look, which makes sense, but leaving the animals in the trees behind. So that was a big policy there as well.
Speaking on this idea of like terminology and methodology when it comes to written policy, that actually segues me great into my bulk of this episode, where I involved most of my research relating to the language and the attitude that fire inherited following the 88 fires. My findings were quite interesting, as we see that following this event, the National Park Service paper wraps up their conversation on the flames in their 88 volume with, I quote, fire is one of the last great natural public enemies. Yet, end quote, yet an interesting evolution occurs throughout official reports, newspapers, and policies following this event, which is that they fully strip away the antagonistic nature of flame. Instead of choosing to reaffirm fires, they choose, apologies, to reaffirm fire's role in parks as essential, which this sentiment was corroborated by Dr. Pine, who had the following to say when asked about the sentiment revolving around park fires.
That's recognized, and we know the fire community is pretty committed to getting fire back in, but there are a lot of constraints, and smoke is adding even more constraints now. It's getting a lot harder to manage. I still think we need some fundamental philosophies. We're still hung up on fire behavior rather than fire ecology, and we think, well, fire behavior is hard-nosed. Let's get serious about this, controlling these dangerous fires. So the theory is you control the fuels, you get the fuels right, and the fires will let nature sort out the ecology. Okay, but you can reverse that. And organizations like the Nature Conservancy do. The idea is to get the ecology right. And then the fire will let the fuels sort themselves out accordingly. And they have different metrics and different consequences and a different sense of what fire means in the landscape. And we're still stuck on the earlier one. We've got to control these. Agencies, politicians don't want to be seen unable to control bad things.
Thank you again, Dr. Pine, for your insights. And yeah, I found it quite interesting how this similar sentiment was seen across reports by the National Park Service in years to come. such as how an official paper recognizing the event 10 years later was fixated, and I quote, reaffirming the positive role of fire in the ecosystem, end quote. Lastly, on my chronological findings, the 2009 federal wildfire policy is littered with phrases promoting the essential nature of fires, while simultaneously emphasizing its need to suppress them.
Thank you for that, Luigi. Obviously, there's still so many issues that we have in the fire management community, but it is good to see that the official policy, which is going to be guiding everything else, has changed for the better. So we have a much more natural, healthy relationship with fire as we go forward, facing climate change and anything else that will impact the environment.
Agreed fully of that sentiment. I'd love to see the interesting shifts we've begun to see through the policy. But sadly, that about wraps our allocated amount of time for this week's installment of Seriously Burning to Know More. I'm Luigi Medell,
I'm Ron.
I'm Liz, they're serious.
and we thank you for your time.